Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Developing a Proper Worldview. This is going to be episode number 50, which is kind of crazy to think that we're 50 episodes into this already. It's kind of exciting. I had no idea what would become of this when we first started. I wasn't sure if I'd be able to keep up the motivation to keep going. What I found is that this is very enjoyable for me. It's probably out of all the different so-called ministry type things I do, this is the one I enjoy the most. I've always had it on my heart to do like a Bible study version of this, live and in person, where we get together as a group and we watch, an hour of a documentary, take notes, and then discuss it afterwards from a spiritual perspective. That never came to fruition. And then, one day it just clicked in my head, like, the Lord has allowed me to do other video, social media type ministries. Why not do this in that same format, in like a watch along format? And so I wasn't sure how it would work out. I wasn't sure if anybody would enjoy it, or I suppose that part don't really matter, but it has been very enjoyable for me. It's been very beneficial to go back through these things, to kind of like, through 20 years of study or whatever, you have all this information in your head, and it's all just jumbled. It's hard to express that information in a linear fashion. And so, like, if I'm trying to explain to somebody, there's a satanic conspiracy, there's a new world order, there's a Luciferian system at work behind our government, or if I try to explain to somebody how the mainstream media is propaganda, it's just lies, or how Mormonism or Jehovah Witnesses or Roman Catholicism is really hidden Luciferianism at the top branches, or 9/11, being an inside job, or when you try to explain Council on Foreign Relations or Bilderberg or Trilateral Commission or the Jesuits, or all these various aspects of this conspiracy. When you're in a one-on-one conversation and you got all this information floating around and you're trying to express that to somebody, it can come across as like if you're coming into it with virgin ears, so to speak. You've never heard anything about this, or you just associate all conspiracy with tinfoil hat wearing, Bigfoot sighting, Loch Ness monster type stuff. It's going to sound like lunacy. You're going to dismiss it. It's going to go in one ear and out the other, and you're trying to hit people with just bullet points, and it doesn't work that way. This is something you have to become adjusted to. You have to see it for yourself, and you have to see how it works, how it's come to be. And so you have to see the beginning formation of it. You have to see the germination of this conspiracy, so to speak, and then you have to see how this aspect fits in, and how this aspect fits in, and how this aspect fits in, and then you start to get the fuller picture. So basically, it's like when you try to present this, it's a big backdrop, like my backdrop here, this huge, I don't know what this is, 6 foot by 4 foot poster, but you're showing it to them right here. They're right, their nose up to it, and you're trying to explain all these aspects of it, but you're realizing all they're seeing is this right here. Their nose is right up to it. So because of that close-up view, like, it's impossible to explain everything that's going on. So what you have to do is like a paint by number. You have to explain each little section, and take them section by section, and then they start to see this expanded picture, and they're able to draw back, so to speak, and then finally they're able to see the whole thing. And so that's really how I learned this. And what I'm trying to do is, because I believe that I've through the grace of God come to a proper biblical understanding of this conspiracy. Not that I have a full understanding of it, because there's parts that are so complex, and there's parts that I don't truly understand how it all works, you know. But I've got the big enough picture of it, and by the grace of God, I've got this biblical understanding that undergirds it. I feel like by the providence of God, by His blessing, He showed me these things in a proper order. He had these things brought to my attention and revealed to me in His sovereign design, in a step-by-step process, so that I was able to compute the whole picture and stand back and see the bigger perspective, see what's going on. And so what I want to do is convey that same image to you. I want to show others that same thing. And so the only way I know how is to take you through the same basic process that I went through. And the vast majority of my understanding came through documentaries. I don't know if it's a visual thing, or it's just a lot easier to view than to take the time to read a book, although books do play a part in this too. And then through just random research online and stuff like that. But just seeing it played out in well-produced, well-documented documentaries, with the tangible evidence to back it up, like reading a book with the footnotes, documentaries that are showing you the evidence. It caused a crystallization of this for me, and I was able to see the whole thing. And so my hope is that I can take you through that same process, and that eventually you'll come to understand what I believe to be the proper biblical understanding of this world system, the world that we currently live in. And so we did part 1, laying the foundation of the gospel. We did part 2 with the lies and the theory of evolution. We did a parenthesis between 2 and 3 with an overview of the conspiracy in the Megiddo series. And now we've started part 3, looking at the occult foundation of America, how the American empire is being solidified and used by Satan to create this new world order system. America is really the driving force, or at least the muscle and the might behind this new world order empire, this beast system that the Bible talks about. And so we've started to look into that with the Chris Pinto documentary, America's Secret Beginnings. And we just started that one. We did part 1. We're about 53 minutes into it, and so that's where we're going to pick up here with this second part of the disc. Very well produced documentaries. Something like I mentioned before, it's like something you'd see on the History Channel. It's just really, really well done. Yeah, as always, just a disclaimer, if you're just catching this randomly, I highly recommend that you go back and watch these in order. There is a purpose to the order. So without further ado, let's just jump into this and continue where we left off. All right, so I was wrong there. I mentioned 53 minutes. It looks like we're at the 50-minute and 14-second mark, the start of this section called the American Revolution. So let's jump into it.
But how to bring about this utopian empire? In his writings, Sir Francis Bacon called for a universal reformation of the whole wide world. To bring about this reform, some believe the secret societies launched a world revolution.
People do not understand that our revolution was the first in a series of revolutions that began in 1776 and extended right up until the Cuban Revolution in 1959, when Fidel Castro came to power. And this is a series of revolutions to transform the world.
While most Americans did not fight the War of Independence for the cause of global revolution, it is undeniable that secret societies played an important role and that many of America's founders were Freemasons.
Many of them were Masons, but they were into Masonry because, of course, this was the only way that they could protect themselves. This was the only way they could keep from being found out. So they were plotting a revolution. They had to have a means of maintaining their secrecy.
I think Masonry was in fact used as a built-in network, a secret network in which to foment the American Revolution. They didn't have to put a network together, it was already there. All they had to do was sort of ride on the back of Freemasonry to make the American Revolution work.
And work it did with the help of Masonic ingenuity, beginning with the kickoff event, the Boston Tea Party.
And what was the Boston Tea Party? Who was behind that? Who were the raiders of the English tea ship? Admittedly, at this point, it was the Masonic Lodge in Boston. They were all Masons. It was the Masons wanting to implement this revolution.
The leader of the men who dressed up like Indians and threw the tea into Boston Harbor was the legendary Paul Revere, whose famous ride would alert Americans that the British were coming. Pictured here with a teapot commemorating his rebellion, Paul Revere was a prominent member of the Masonic Order. George Washington, known as the father of our country, along with many of his generals, were also Masons. Yet Washington's involvement with Masonry is hotly debated.
Our information is that he did not do anything with the Masonic Lodge for the last 30 years of his life.
The debate centers around a letter written by George Washington to the Reverend G.W. Schneider on September 25, 1798, just 15 months before Washington's death. In the letter, Washington says specifically, "I must correct an error you have run into of my presiding over the English lodges in this country. The fact is, I preside over none, nor have I been in one more than once or twice within the last 30 years.
And in Washington's case, I defend him by saying the Masons are very secretive. And when they approach a man to be a member of their organization, they will not and cannot tell him what it's all about. But what they can do is to say, well, you see, there were all these famous people. They were Freemasons, and they can name off the kings. And today, of course, they can name off Washington. And so the candidate will then argue to himself, well, who am I? I'm just a little guy, or I might be a senator, but nevertheless, who am I compared with these? If it was good enough for them, surely it's good enough for me. If it's secret, it's going to be a good thing. So they get in, and they're not told the whole story. They're not told in the first, second, or even third degree. They're not told the whole story, but little by little, as they acquire more knowledge, and as they are deemed to be faithful to the cause, they are told more. And that's just how they get the people in.
It is only fair to mention that many Masons continue to insist that Washington was very active in the craft. Yet there is no debate about the
It's a tricky thing with history. Like, it's so hard to know what's reliable and what's not. There's so many contradictory stories about some of these founding fathers, like Washington. You hear he was this good Christian man. You hear he was a Mason. You hear it's like you don't know what the truth is on issues like this because unfortunately we can't trust history books. History's written by the winners, they say. The controlling powers of the educational system, like through the Rockefeller foundations and things like that, their direct involvement in education and specifically with textbooks. They decide what's told. And so you hear all these things growing up, and it's like, and then, through research you find alternative stories, and it's like, man, what's true, what's not, was he a Mason? Was he a godly man? Was he at one point a Mason and then got out, and or was Masonry different back then? Only the high level initiates knew about the Illuminism in it. It's complex to know. Other characters like Ben Franklin, he was a wicked man, part of the Hellfire Club, and he was a Satanist. And Thomas Jefferson, he was a deist. He took parts out of the Bible. So there's other guys that it's pretty crystal clear on where they stood.
Masonic membership of Benjamin Franklin, who is deeply involved not only with Masonry, but a whole variety of secret societies in America, in England, and in France. Societies that had everything to do with his success during the American Revolutionary War.
Benjamin Franklin is a very paradoxical, complex fellow, as might be expected for someone who was such a great genius. But at times he seems like he's a Christian. At times he seems like he's a scoundrel. At times it seems like he's a Luciferian, and at times it seems like he's a Rosicrucian.
He was a strange character, Benjamin Franklin, a sort of a shuttle diplomat between Philadelphia and Paris and London, England.
He was, of course, an ambassador in Europe, and when he was over in Europe, he became a member of a group called the Hellfire Club, which was a kind of pseudo-satanic organization in 1700s. It was founded by an English nobleman named Francis Dashwood, and it basically existed as a place where men could gather and have orgies and worship the devil and basically get loaded and do whatever they wanted, under the guise of it being a satanic society.
The Hellfire Club was a part of the so-called gentlemen's clubs of 17th and 18th century England. While the debauched behavior of these groups was initially tolerated, once they began to dabble in satanic rituals, they were forced to go underground, literally.
Hellfire Club, as a matter of fact, I used to live quite near that place. It's on the west side of London, at a place called West Wickham. It's a hill. It's a chalk hill, now of course covered in grass, and on the top of that chalk hill is a church. On the top of the church is a golden ball. There's a cross on top of that. Now that's a Christian church, but inside the hill is a cave. Often those chalk hills, they do have caves inside them. It's the way they're formed. And in the cave there, they would gather together. Now, I don't say that it was the church, the occupants of the church that gathered there, but whether they knew it or not, the Hellfire Club would hold their meetings once a month underneath the church. And Benjamin Franklin would go and visit that at the times when he came to visit England, yeah.
He was very much apparently into some of the ideas of the esoteric movement of his day.
It's a word, if you're not familiar with it, you probably want to learn that esoteric. Exoteric is like known, visible, obvious, shown. I think that's how you say it, exoteric, yeah. Esoteric is hidden, secretive. So it's important to know that when studying the occult or witchcraft or anything like that, there's a public front that's put out an exoteric meaning, but then there's an esoteric hidden meaning behind it. Like Freemasonry, they show you the square and compass, and they say, well, it's because Masons do Masonry, and they use those tools. But there's actually an esoteric hidden meaning with like fertility worship, male and female reproductive organs and things like that. Or another example would be like in Egypt, when they would worship the sun, the regular people were told that the sun was God, the S-U-N was God, and that they should worship that. Those who advanced in the priesthood were told the esoteric meaning behind that, behind their symbols, their Ra symbols, that it wasn't really the sun they were worshiping, it was the energies coming through the sun. And then, even at a higher level, they were taught that no, those energies are actually coming from Sirius, the dog star, which is a satanic Luciferian system. Again, it's a mystery religion thing. So there's a public front. Another example would be in today's culture, Dodge, the automobile maker. They have a pentagon shape with what they say is a ram's head in the middle, Dodge Ram. That's the exoteric front. The esoteric meaning is that's the star of Satan. It's an upside down pentagram with the goat's head in the middle, letting you know that whoever owns Dodge or whoever runs Dodge is part of that Luciferian system. Starbucks with their logo. I don't know what their exoteric meaning of that logo is, but esoterically hidden, secretive. That's Mystery Babylon. That's the mermaid goddess with the 5-point star on top of her and the Dagon fish miters next to her. And it's a mermaid goddess. It's a New Age occult symbol. So there's esoteric meaning behind things, hidden meaning. So it's just an important term that you should know when studying things like this.
A book on witchcraft, magic, and the supernatural claims that Benjamin Franklin often came to Sir Francis Dashwood for information on the occult. Dashwood himself was said to be a Rosicrucian and leading member of the secret orders. In this portrait, we see a young Francis Dashwood with his hand posed in a fist-like position. In Masonry, this hand signal is known as the lion's paw and is used in Masonic ritual. Among Satanists, however, this same gesture is said to be called the devil's claw. While it cannot be said how deeply involved Franklin was with the occult, the hellfire focus on drinking and debauching women would certainly have agreed with his character.
He was very famous for being a ladies' man. He was very much a playboy, which of course would be contrary to being a devout Christian.
The Hellfire Club had great disdain for Christianity. In fact, they did not call themselves Hellfire, but rather the monks of Medmenham Abbey. Such parody was the influence of a French priest named Francois Rabelais, condemned as a heretic for writing a series of perverse comedies called Gargantua and Pantagruel. In them, Rabelais mocked religion, glorified immorality, and defended man's right to pursue without restraint the desires of his own will. Adopting his philosophy, the Hellfire motto was, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." Could this have been what attracted Franklin to the group? An opportunity to escape.
Do what thou wilt should be the whole of the law. That's the first commandment of the Satanic Bible. I think that's Aleister Crowley that wrote that book.
The puritanical tendencies of America, while in England to pursue lusty desires that would have been openly condemned by his fellow countrymen, at least at that time. But more than a century later, the Hellfire motto would be adopted by British occultist Aleister Crowley, who was often called the wickedest man in the world. Like Francis Dashwood and the Hellfire members, Crowley took part in satanic rituals, most famously at his Abbey Thelema in Sicily, a name taken from Francois Rabelais' anti-Christian parodies. Crowley's hatred for Christianity was so intense he often referred to himself as the Beast of the Apocalypse from the Book of Revelation. He was a Freemason and a Rosicrucian who made Do What Thou Wilt famous through the 20th century, with followers like L. Ron Hubbard, the founder of Scientology, Harvard professor and drug guru Timothy Leary, and even Beatles founder John Lennon. Crowley is often credited with sparking the 1960s cultural revolution, the do-your-own-thing mentality dedicated to sex, drugs, and rock and roll. What could be called the modern legacy of men like Franklin, Dashwood, and the Hellfire Club. But wait a minute. Obviously, it cannot be said that Franklin's involvement with the Hellfire Club is to be fully equated with the often crazed activities of a man like Crowley, or even Timothy Leary. Still, one must wonder what Franklin was doing with a group of immoral aristocrats who dabbled in devil worship, even if they were just kidding around, as some have suggested. Is it likely that this legendary founder of America, the man who discovered electricity, invented the bifocals, and co-authored the Declaration of Independence, simply spent his time in England getting drunk and seducing women. Franklin was known to be a crafty fellow. Could his dealings with Dashwood and the Hellfire Club have somehow been a part of a greater agenda? After all, Sir Francis Dashwood was no ordinary drunken rake. He also happened to be a member of the British Parliament and was a close friend and advisor to King George III, the man the American colonists would rebel against. The Hellfire Club itself were made up of English nobility, some of whom held high offices in the King's government. Was it mere coincidence that these men, close friends of Franklin, just happened to be in power when the British were defeated? In his book, The Occult Conspiracy, author Michael Howard chronicles how Benjamin Franklin came to England in 1758 to discuss the future of the American colonies with Sir Francis Dashwood. Meanwhile, British historian Richard Deacon, in his History of the British Secret Service, claims that Dashwood's Hellfire Club functioned as a center of English espionage. Because of Franklin's many clandestine activities, some involving a British double agent named Edward Bancroft, Deacon and fellow historian Professor Cecil B. Curry speculate that Ben Franklin may have been a covert spy for the British government, known either as Number 72 or with the code name Moses. But was Franklin working for the British? Or were secret powers within the King's own government working with Franklin for the ancient plan of all secret societies, the New Atlantis? Why would British intelligence refer to Benjamin Franklin as Moses? Normally, enemies are given names like Carlos the Jackal or the Butcher of Baghdad. But Moses? Was the name itself a kind of cipher or secret code? Had they already determined that as Moses led the children of Israel from the bondage of Egypt, so Franklin would lead the American colonies to freedom from King George? Could this be why Benjamin Franklin's initial design for the Great Seal of the United States was that of Moses, standing on the shoreline of the Red Sea as the waters destroyed Pharaoh and his army, with the motto, "Rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God"? Coincidence? Maybe. Yet in his book, America's Secret Destiny, author Robert Hieronymus, whose doctrinal thesis on the reverse of the Great Seal has been used by the White House, the State Department, and the Department of the Interior, makes the comment that Franklin's design for the seal represented, quote, how he viewed America's birth and destiny. Did Franklin really see himself as Moses, defeating King George, the colonial pharaoh, with the help of Dashwood and the Hellfire Club? An alarming theory. But for British intelligence to undermine King George on behalf of a secret agenda should not be terribly surprising, at least not to the modern American. Consider the conflict between President John F. Kennedy and the CIA during the Bay of Pigs invasion. The CIA reportedly lied to the president on behalf of their secret agenda involving an assassination attempt on Fidel Castro, something that would later lead to the Cuban Missile Crisis. JFK was so surprised at their power, believing it to be a threat to the American people, he vowed to shatter the CIA into 1,000 pieces. Or what about the Iran-Contra?
Just real quick on that JFK thing, George Bush Sr. Was part of that Bay of Pigs CIA thing and supposedly played a part in JFK's assassination. That's something we'll get into further down the line as well. We're not going to look into the JFK assassination because it's just there's a lot of things that are just kind of outliers to the main focus of this. Waco, Texas, the Oklahoma City bombing, the JFK assassination, all these different things that are like the CIA drug trafficking, the Contra thing, all that. They're parts of the conspiracy, or at least they're I don't know what they stem. The reason they happened is because of this conspiracy, but mainly we're trying to build the main pillar to show this new world order system, how it operates and the things it does, which is another thing. Like, I've been wrestling on whether or not, I have several documentaries on communism, and I've been debating on whether or not we should go over those, because communism is just one branch. Like, I think some people focus on that too much: socialism, communism, fascism, and they think that is the issue. But that's just one of the streams of getting into this totalitarian, authoritarian system. It's not the enemy. It's just a means of bringing some nations into this stream. It's a method of creating this new world order empire. So I don't know if it's really. I mean, there's a lot of good information in it. So maybe I'll just reference it and you can check it out on your own. When we get to that part. But same with like Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative. That's all just illusion. It's really irrelevant. It's distractionary to the main focus here of this Luciferian evil system being established. I forget what my point was there, but the JFK thing. Yeah, so a lot of things we're not going to get into, but if I have good resources on certain things as they come up, I'll reference them to you. Since we're speaking about communism, I'll just tell you anything you can find on G. Edward Griffin. G. Edward Griffin. Griffin. He's probably my hero. The guy is a genius. So well researched, so well spoken. Everything he says is so accurate and on target. His main focus is the banking system and exposing central banking. And so way down the line, Lord willing, we're going to get into some of that. But he's also done research on cancer, population control type stuff. Well, I don't know if he gets into the population control aspect of it, but just the conspiracy of the cover-up on cancer, which again is something we probably won't touch on directly, but it'll come up indirectly. But then he's got a ton of stuff on socialism, fascism, communism, which is all gathered together in a term called collectivism. There's really only two forms of government: individualism or collectivism, and all totalitarian systems fall under this collective system, whether it's monarchies, dictatorships, fascists, Nazis, communists, socialists. That's all collectivism. The constitutional republic was an individual system. Was, because we no longer are that, but so you can go, like, he's got he's been around for years. In the 60s, he did a lecture. You can go find that on YouTube, where it's like he's talking about today. You're hearing him say things, and it's like, man, that is what is happening in society today. It's genius. And he's got one we're going to watch here relatively soon. It's probably 6-7 discs after this one, called The Collectivist Conspiracy, where he explains the illusion of the left-right paradigm, the Republican-Democrat paradigm, how it's nonsense. It's an illusion. That's really good as well. So we'll get a lot into him as well. But he's got anything you can find on him on communism is worth watching. He's got a 6-part documentary called Hidden Agenda, which, like I say, it was kind of just peripheral information, but well worth researching. You can look at that. You can look at Agenda 1 and 2, which is really focusing on the communist aspect of. But again, communism is just a path towards New World Order. There's America was this constitutional republic, and it seems like as we were the individualist country, and then we went to a democracy, which is part of collectivism, and then we're progressing into socialism, and then it'll be communism and fascism, totalitarianism. It blends, and it's a continual digression towards this totalitarian system. So communism is just a step on the path to New World Order totalitarianism, New World Order Luciferian dictatorship. Communism is just a step towards that. It's not the real issue. So we won't really focus on it, but I highly recommend you go watch those if you want to do some further research on that. Hidden Agenda by G. Edward Griffin, a 6-part DVD series. Agenda parts 1 and 2. You could watch. Those are the main ones, and then anything you can find on YouTube by G. Edward Griffin. Just watch clips, watch everything you can find on, and it's all great stuff.
Affair, where President Ronald Reagan stated emphatically that the U.S. was not providing arms to Iran in exchange for hostages being held by pro-Iranian terror groups.
In spite of the wildly speculated and false stories about arms for hostages and alleged ransom payments, we did not trade weapons or anything else for hostages.
But Reagan soon returned with an apology once he learned that, yes, the U.S. was illegally selling arms to Iran, an enemy country. The profits from the sales were then being used to finance a secret CIA operation involving the Contras in Nicaragua. As with JFK, Reagan claimed that he had been manipulated and lied to by secret powers within the intelligence community.
It's going on that had been kept from me in various covert operations.
Did they deceive you? You didn't answer when the coroner at Poindexter and North deceived you.
Presidents Reagan and Kennedy were humiliated at being the most powerful men in the world who were unaware of what the hidden powers in their own government were up to. Well, at least in the case of Kennedy. It was later revealed that President Reagan knew more about the covert actions of the intelligence community than he had let on. After all, his vice president, George Bush Sr., was the former head of the CIA and a member of an elite secret society known as the Skull and Bones. Some find it interesting that while in office, President Reagan was made an honorary 33rd degree Mason. Since then, America's presidents have all been members of secret orders, including Skull and Bonesman George W. Bush, whose war on terror is said by some to have sparked the beginnings of World War III. Bush claimed it was the CIA who provided the information about weapons of mass destruction that ultimately led to the war in Iraq. As of the making of this documentary, that information has turned out to be false. An intelligence error? Maybe. Or perhaps the same powers that were working in the days of Benjamin Franklin have never really ceased to function. Is it just a coincidence that the war on terror has provided the opportunity to spread democracy to all the world?
Spreading the New World Order.
And this is what people don't understand, as our president talks about how we want to bring democracy to all these countries of the world. Well, why doesn't he want to bring a republic to these countries? We were a republic. We were never a democracy.
Amen.
It is only the people from the mystery religions and the secret societies who are pushing this idea of world democracy, or this combination of enlightened nations, enlightened democracies to rule the world. As incredible as it may seem, there are really people who believe that. They're working full-time to accomplish that goal. And until you understand that they are the primary force behind the wars of this last century and World War III, which we are entering into today, unless they understand that the whole idea is to create this reestablishment of what they believe is lost Atlantis, this wonderful utopian society that they believe existed eons ago. Anybody who's studied the history of America knows we were not established as a democracy. Our founding fathers didn't believe in democracy. They wanted a republic, a government of law, not the democracy, which is what the secret societies have been working for well over 3,000 years.
Could this be the secret behind what's happening in the world today? And was this the underlying motive in the war for American independence?
So many thoughts there. I apologize for stopping. I don't know if I've explained this before or not, but a lot of people don't know, I didn't know, the difference between a constitutional republic and a democracy. You grow up and you just hear that word democracy, democracy, democracy. You never even stop to consider, wait a minute, we're not a democracy. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands. Like, it never clicks that, wait a minute, democracy is a different form of government than a republic. We were formed as a constitutional republic. And a republic says that every single individual, every person is guaranteed inalienable rights. And those rights are defined in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Every individual, no matter what, cannot have those rights violated. You have the right to say whatever you want, to write whatever you want, to worship however you want, to own guns, to have your own private property, things like that. Those are inalienable rights. If you decide if you want to worship the Lord in the biblical way, but you're the only one, you're outnumbered in America 99% to 1. Everybody's against you. Doesn't matter. In a republic, you're guaranteed that right. It can't be taken from you. You're protected by the Constitution, by the law. Every individual has that. So it's a government for the minority. It's a government for one. Every man has inalienable rights protected by the Constitution. A democracy is the opposite of that. A democracy is a mob rule mentality. A democracy says 51%, a majority of the population, determines what is lawful and right for everybody. So if 51% of the population decides you can't worship the Lord God, you can't worship according to the Bible, you can't speak the gospel, 51% decides that in a democracy, you can't do it. You no longer have that right. The rights are determined by the majority. So minorities, the minority of one is no longer protected. Majority wins. And so then people are influenced. That's why things like immigration and all that come into play, because you bring in third world people who don't respect or don't understand the right to worship, or they worship pagan gods, so they don't respect the biblical Christianity. You got like censorship going on. You got all this stuff. It's all politicians can sway a majority through offering them free things, by bringing in people who don't respect those constitutional rights and the Christian Judeo ethic. By doing that, they can create a majority that's opposed. So that's where that's going. So when Bush or Obama or whoever says we're spreading democracy across the world, that's a bad thing. We're creating the New World Order system. The American empire is using its military might to go into other nations that are sovereign and free. Yes, some of them are wicked and under dictators, but we have no right to go in there and enforce our will upon them. When they said there's weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, we got to go get Iraq. Okay, then when it came out that there weren't weapons of mass destruction, that it was a lie, why didn't we withdraw our troops? Why do we still have troops there today? Why do we have troops in like 180 countries or something like that? We're building a new world order. We're spreading democracy. Because democracy, again, is just a step towards socialism, which is a step towards communism, which is a step towards fascism, which is a step towards Luciferian dictatorship. That's all it's doing. It's going downhill. And so it's spreading that, and there's countries that are outside of that reach, and usually it's dictators. It's guys that don't want to give up their power to the world government, Iran, Iraq, North Korea, stuff like that, Cuba. And that's why Bush labeled them the axis of evil, and then we started going and taking these over. Those were the last remaining strongholds of national sovereignty, even if it is like a wicked form of national sovereignty. They weren't part of the New World Order system, but they're being brought in. We went and conquered Iraq. We went and conquered Sudan. We went and conquered Libya. Venezuela collapsed. Cuba right now is in a revolution, probably fomented by the CIA. We're constantly talking about the threat of North Korea and Iran, getting it in people's minds that these guys are to be feared. So when we do declare war, everybody's behind it. That's just the way the system works. But I just wanted to throw out those 2 points while that was fresh on my mind.
To wrest the new world from the power of the old, that it might in time be used to bring forth the great Atlantean plan, envisioned by Sir Francis Bacon.
Benjamin Franklin certainly knew the works of Francis Bacon and all the ethics and things that he was trying to establish.
Bacon was a man that Benjamin Franklin had much in common with. Both men were the leading scientists of their time. Both men were involved in printing, and both men published works that helped to transform the people of their generation. Both men developed their own system of ciphers and secret codes, which they used for intelligence purposes during wartime. And both men were deeply involved in the Masonic and Rosicrucian movements of their day. Franklin was a member of Masonic and secret orders in America, in England, and in France, the 3 countries involved in the American Revolution. But some researchers argue that his influence in France truly demonstrates his loyalty to a plan that looked beyond America, to a global revolution.
He was the master of the Lodge of the Nine Sisters, Neuchoir, the Lodge of the Nine Sisters right in Paris, and that's where the revolution started, incidentally. So he was lodge master there every time he visited the place.
He, as so many young people, very intelligent people, really believed that man could create a better society without being totally reliant upon God. And of course, we know that eventually he went to France, and when he was in France as the American ambassador to France, he was instrumental in pushing these ideas that led to the French Revolution.
Franklin went to France to convince King Louis XVI to finance the American Revolution. But in the process, Franklin was preaching radical ideas that would later on inspire the French to overthrow Louis, the very monarch who had helped to pave for the founding of America. Americans desperately needed money to fight the War of Independence because, according to Franklin, England had ruined their economy to keep America from becoming too prosperous.
When he was ambassador to England, the Bank of England said, how come America, the representatives of the Bank of England said, how come America is getting so rich? And Franklin, in his autobiography, recounts the story. He said, well, that's easy. In America, we create our own money and we owe no interest to pay to no one. So the Bank of England said, oh, that's very interesting. So they immediately had passed through Parliament the Currency Act of 1764. And what did the Currency Act do? It outlawed the creation of America's own money and put America on the gold standard, made Americans pay their taxes in gold or silver coin, which of course was very scarce in the American colonies in those days. So what was the result? It immediately plunged America into a deep depression. Franklin says that this depression, and everyone in America was well aware of what the depression, who caused the depression, why it was caused, just because England outlawed America just simply printing its own money, and that it was this Currency Act of 1764 that was really the root cause of the American Revolution, because it caused so much unemployment and a terrible economic upheaval. And Franklin's quote is, we could have endured a little tax on tea and other matters, but it was England's taking away our ability to create our own currency that was really the root cause of the revolution.
And so King Louis supported the American cause through financial aid and the use of troops. But some years later, many of the French soldiers who fought for America would return to France to fight the French Revolution. Among their leaders would be an American hero, the Marquis de Lafayette, who served alongside George Washington. Lafayette was also a Freemason and close acquaintance of Benjamin Franklin, the man who seemed to be the friend of nearly all the revolutionaries of the day.
It was Benjamin Franklin who initiated Voltaire himself in 1778. He could then brag and say, "Oh, Voltaire was a Mason." Oh, people would say, if it's good enough for him, it must be good enough for me. I don't know what it's all about, but it sounds like a good thing.
While the writings of Voltaire inspired the French revolutionaries, Americans were compelled by another of Franklin's close friends, Thomas Paine.
Thomas Paine was a member of the Lunar Society. Benjamin Franklin would go and meet with them, Anyway, he recognised in Thomas Paine that the fellow was, he was pretty good at writing. And so he brought him back with him to Philadelphia. And he wrote the pamphlets that started the revolution in America. It was a little booklet called Common Sense. Thomas Paine wrote that. And it was kind of inciting people to war against King George III.
With the help of Paine and his fellow Masons, Franklin worked to create the revolutionary mentality among the colonies.
Yes, Franklin developed the concept of the virtuous revolution. The thought of revolting against a monarch amongst European people was absolutely anathema. It went totally against the European mindset of the divine right of kings, where government is of God, kings are appointed by God, and so the virtuous revolution was something really different.
But not all Masons went along with Franklin's ideas, like the man known as the Great American Trader, Benedict Arnold, also a Mason who chose to side with the British during the war. Nevertheless, for good or for ill, Masonry was clearly at the helm of the War of Independence. It seems ironic, however, that American Masonry today owes its allegiance to the very country it rebelled against. Modern Masons trace their official beginning to the United Grand Lodge of England, founded in 1717.
The official start of modern Masonry is in 1717 in the Apple Tree Tavern in London, where the first Grand Lodge of England was convened. And that's called the Mother Lodge, because essentially all English-speaking lodges precipitate out of that. And for example, all American lodges, all the different Grand Lodges of the different states, all ultimately owe their allegiance and their warrant to the Grand Lodge of England.
Yet prior to the formation of the Grand Lodge, the seeds of modern Masonry had already been sown through the work of Francis Bacon.
Francis Bacon established the Masonic organization, that whole body that was established by Francis Bacon. The ethical programs that were inherent within that, he was responsible for all those. His philosophy, his ethics, his literature that he was responsible for would certainly be known to Benjamin Franklin.
Was Franklin following Bacon's plan? Was it mere coincidence that he was a chief catalyst in the launching of the American Revolution? Or that his influence would also bring about the revolution in France? Masonic philosopher Manly P. Hall wrote that not only were many American founders Masons, but they received aid from a secret and august body existing in Europe, which helped them to establish this country for a peculiar and particular purpose, known only to the initiated few. Hall further suggests that Benjamin Franklin was among those few. In his book, The Secret Destiny of America, Hall writes of Franklin's involvement with the plan of Francis Bacon. In Chapter 13, titled Bacon's Secret Society Set Up in America, Hall features an illustration showing the eastern seaboard with Benjamin Franklin overseeing it, while beside him is the shadow of Bacon. Hall claims that Franklin spoke for the secret societies, and that most of the men who worked with him in the early days of the American Revolution were also members. He says, quote, "The plan was working out. The new Atlantis was coming into being in accordance with the program laid down by Francis Bacon." To those who have studied him, Sir Francis Bacon is one of the most enigmatic figures in world history. Baconian societies have existed for centuries since his death in 1626. All of them credit Bacon with the great advancements of the New World.
Bacon is such an interesting character, such a complex character. He was right at the center of the storm politically. He even claimed in one of his writings that he was in possession of all knowledge. You can't say that he was ignorant of the Christian concept. He obviously had some concept of Christianity and speaks of the Lord Jesus Christ, and yet he's a proponent of the New Atlantis concept. Just a very complicated character.
Bacon is known as the father of modern science and the grandfather of the English Enlightenment. The phrase, knowledge is power, is often attributed to him and represents his philosophy that through knowledge or science, mankind could transform himself and the world into its highest state of enlightenment.
Same why Satan told in the garden.
His dedication to science and learning led to the birth of England's premier scientific organization. When the Royal Society of England was formed in 1662, they named Bacon as their model and inspiration.
There's a book written by Thomas Sprat, who was the first president of the Royal Society, so this goes back to the early 1700s, and he wrote a history on it. And he acknowledged there that Francis Bacon was the originator of the idea.
Yet even beyond the Royal Society, 20th century historian Will Durant wrote that the whole tenor and career of British thought have followed the philosophy of Bacon, a philosophy brought to America and furthered by some of her most influential leaders. Thomas Jefferson considered Francis Bacon one of the three most important men in history, along with John Locke and Sir Isaac Newton. It is even said that Jefferson believed he was fulfilling Bacon's dream for a new Atlantis by founding the United States. As a result, nearly all Baconians credit Bacon with the founding of America. This painting, once owned by Baconian author Marie Bauer Hall, shows the North American continent with the spirit of Bacon rising from the midst. Above his head is the all-seeing eye of Horus in the midst of a triangle, while upon his cloak is the rose and cross, the symbol of his Rosicrucians. Despite these things, little is mentioned about Lord Bacon in the history books of America. There are no states, cities, towns, or schools named after him, which begs the question, other than Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, which of the founding fathers did he really influence?
Which of those founding fathers were most influenced by Bacon's work? I would suggest it was all those who were Freemasons.
Well, I think probably all the first presidents of America who were Freemasons, you could say, were influenced by him because of the influence that went into Freemasonry, but by Bacon. But I expect some were more influenced than others, or more inspired than others, and some may not even have known that Bacon was behind it all, sent from an inspirer. But maybe they all did. I mean, they were pretty intelligent men.
Bacon is considered by some to be the first Grand Master of modern Freemasonry. While the craft would not be officially established until after his death, it was Bacon who mapped out the plan for the ultimate aim of Masonry and all secret societies, the establishment of a new Atlantis. Peter Dawkins is the founder and president of the Francis Bacon Research Trust in England. He has dedicated more than 33 years to the study of Bacon, having written some 14 books about him, with titles such as Building Paradise and Francis Bacon, Herald of the New Age.
My research into the life and work of Francis Bacon and all those connected with him, which also takes me back into the wisdom traditions, which I'm very interested in, and into also things like the founding of America, the spread of modern science,
Wisdom
and many other
traditions.
fascinating subjects.
It's like
That's
a gateway.
another way of saying mystery
Like a gateway into
religions.
huge wealth of information and knowledge for today.
Dawkins' work is supported by the Pro-Grand Master of English Masonry, the Marquis de Northampton. The Grand Master in England is Prince Edward, the Duke of Kent. Because he is a member of the royal family, Masonry allows Prince Edward to appoint someone to act in his place. As such, the Pro-Grand Master, Lord Northampton, is the acting head of all British Freemasonry. While he declined to be interviewed for this documentary, in his correspondence with our producer, he made it clear that he supports Dawkins' research and considers him an expert on Sir Francis Bacon. This is significant because the Northampton legacy dates back to the time of Bacon and Queen Elizabeth I. Today, Lord Northampton holds authority over Canonbury Tower, where Francis Bacon lived in his lifetime and where he is said to have met with his secret societies.
It's a fascinating building, and quite a lot of it's still left. It was once a big mansion house, and there's one wing of it left, and also a tower, which was at the end of another wing which has disappeared. And this tower is known as Canonbury Tower. And the whole mansion itself was enlarged and decorated by a man called Sir John Spencer in Queen Elizabeth's time. And he'd had a year as Lord Mayor. He was quite an important guy in the City of London, and very, very wealthy merchant. And he had a home in London itself, and he also had Canonbury Mansion as his country home, because then it was in the country. Now it's just surrounded by London, part of London, but then it was in the country, up on a hill, and a wonderful place to go to get the country air and good for your health. And Sir John Spencer was clearly involved with Freemasonry and the early Rosicrucian group, and he embellished all the rooms of the house with special carvings on the oak panelling, which have Masonic and Rosicrucian themes.
I wonder if I could do, I don't know of any documentaries that show all the different symbolism that the occults use. They're really big on symbols and numbers and stuff like that, and they think that there's occultic power in symbols and demonic energy. Of course they wouldn't call it demonic, but are focused on symbols. That's why Satanists use the pentagon, and witches use the upright 5-point star, and Freemasonry uses their symbols and all that. But and there's, like I said, there's hidden esoteric meaning behind symbols, and they tag their stuff with symbols. Big corporations will use occult symbols, letting you know that whoever owns that, or whoever runs it, or whoever founded it was into the occult. It's everywhere. Once you know what you're looking for, it is everywhere. AOL, Marlboro, CBS, Chrysler, Dodge, just everywhere. But I don't know. There's a book you can get by Tex Mars called Codex Magica, which goes into a lot of the symbolism. I think you can find interviews with Tex Mars going through parts of that book. I did a video series years and years ago. It's on my YouTube channel. I think it's just Illuminati parts 1 through 40. It's before I really knew how to use YouTube, so each video is like only 10 minutes long, and I didn't do audio on it, so it's all you have to read. And I scrolled it slow enough where everybody could read, but you might lose patience watching it. But if you jump ahead, I don't know what part it would be, maybe somewhere around the 20s. I go through as many of those symbols as I could find, and then show you all the different corporations that use those symbols. But it's symbols for Ra, symbols for the sun god, symbols, phallic symbols, fertility god symbols, just all these different mystery religion symbology that show the occult, especially in corporations. I think my main focus was to show it in corporations and government. But maybe, yeah, I don't think we'll ever go through that, but just for your reference, if you want to go on my YouTube channel, I have a playlist called Illuminati, I think. And I think it's like a 40-part video series, so if each one's 10 minutes long, it's probably like a 6-7 hour series. You can watch through that if you want. It goes in depth on a lot of this stuff, so might be worth checking out, or check out Tex Mars Codex Magica. The hand position there, that's Masonic.
And particularly the fireplaces are done very, very carefully, especially. But the Compton and Spencer rooms still have the original carved panelling in, and the carved fireplaces, full of Masonic and Rosicrucian themes. That was done by Sir John Spencer, and the carvings are dated around about 1598 to 1601, that period. Well, eventually the house was taken over by Francis Bacon when he became when he was made Lord Keeper of the Great Seal and then Lord Chancellor, and he rented the house for the rest of his life. And it's during this time that what's called the Invisible College was founded, and many other things were done, and he's known to have carried out scientific experiments there. And it's quite clear too that the house was the perfect meeting place for his Rosicrucian group. You know, it was a headquarters outside London. It was private in those days. It could be well protected out of prying eyes.
This labor of pursuing knowledge in secret represents Bacon's belief and method of working. In his New Atlantis, he wrote of a society that observed all things, but was known by no one. The symbolism of Bacon's home at Canonbury Tower, with all its mystery, supports the mystical view of the man, held by Dawkins himself.
Well, using sort of Eastern terms, I'd say he was a master, but what in India they call a real master. But he was here in Europe, in the UK, or in England at that time. And he was just an extraordinary being. I actually think that he was the one that Paracelsus made the prophecy about, called Elias the Artist, referring to Elijah. And in tradition, Elijah is said to come again and again to prepare people for the coming of the Messiah, or coming of the Christ, which has many different interpretations. And Bacon himself called himself the herald of the New Age, which is the title of Elijah.
The question posed by critics of Baconian theology is, what Christ did Bacon come to herald? Was it the Christ of the Bible, or the Christ of Masonry and the ancient mystery religion? In the ancient mysteries, a trinity is also recognized, and is represented by a symbol that is little talked about, but one that some believe stands at the heart of all the Masonic tradition. It is known as the 47th proposition of Euclid, or the Pythagorean theorem. Manly P. Hall illustrates and explains the occult symbolism of this theorem in his book, The Secret Teachings of All Ages. According to Hall, the right triangle represents this trinity. The perpendicular side symbolizes the masculine, or divine father, while the base represents the feminine, or divine mother. Finally, the hypotenuse is looked upon as the offspring of them both, the divine child, who is sometimes called the Masonic Christ. Was this what Bacon came to herald? A Christ that delivers man through knowledge or science? According to Peter Dawkins, Bacon's desire was to deliver mankind from the fall he had suffered in the Garden of Eden, to restore him to paradise through what he called the 6 days' work.
So he always believed that as man was made in the image of God, as the Bible says, therefore we should imitate what God does. All his work imitates what he's learned from the Bible and from the interpretations of the Bible. And so the 6 days' work of creation is how to create paradise, because that's in the Bible what's created as a result of the 6 days' work. So he calls his great instauration also the 6 days' work, 6 days' work of creation. And it's all planned out according to what he understood about what those 6 days or stages of creation can mean when interpreted into the human role, what human beings can do.
While Bacon based his understanding on the Bible, Dawkins admits that his approach was not through traditional Christian doctrine, but rather a mystical view based on the teachings of Kabbalah.
He worked like a Kabbalist.
Jewish magic.
He was a master of the Kabbalah, and particularly the Christian Kabbalah. The Kabbalah goes back through the Hebrews, through Moses, to ancient Egypt, and before that it's said to Enoch, who was the great initiate and king of Atlantis. And it said all the teachings come from Enoch, including this Kabbalah. And Bacon was a great master of Kabbalah. His whole work is based on Kabbalistic principles.
While explaining Kabbalah could go on indefinitely, it might be generally called the Jewish version of the ancient mystery religion. In the modern world, Kabbalah has gained popularity among celebrities and is practiced by Barbra Streisand, Mick Jagger, Roseanne Barr, Britney Spears, Jeff Goldblum, Elizabeth Taylor, Paris Hilton, Demi Moore, Winona Ryder, and of course Madonna, who has become a principal spokesman, much to the objection of some traditional Jews. In short, Kabbalah is designed to lead mankind to perfection, where man becomes a godlike being. It is a system that goes...
So all of these, you can see how it all traces back to that lie in the garden. The devil said, eat from the tree of knowledge. Get this hidden knowledge, this forbidden knowledge, and you can become God. And so all these branches of the mysteries, Babylonian, Greek, Kabbalah, scientific, humanistic approach to it, whatever it is, they all have that same philosophy undergirding it, and it's just developed into it's that original seed that was planted there in the garden has blossomed into this huge occultic tree. So no matter which division of this tree it goes into, it's working towards this New World Order system, because the head of each of those branches is Lucifer. It's the serpent at the top of all these, deceiving everybody, telling them, you shall be as gods. Here's hidden mysteries, hidden knowledge that you can get.
Hand in hand with the concept of building paradise on earth. Sir Francis Bacon, the great Kabbalist, believed that the pursuit of science, or knowledge, was the way to achieve this great work.
Most schoolboys used to know who Francis Bacon was and what he contributed to our knowledge today, and it was the method of science.
Well, his first most public and fundamental effect he had was to form the basis of modern science, which is the experimental method. So he promoted what Socrates had also promoted, which was to not just think in your mind and argue, through arguments and so on, which is an Aristotelian method, but actually go out and look what is there in reality, in nature, and study nature, and derive your thoughts and ideas from that, and base experiments on that to see if they work. Then if they work and if they're useful, and they're proved useful over a length of time, then you might consider you've got perhaps a bit of truth, and then you build on that. Well, up to Bacon's time, most of what one could call science, which was not really properly existing as such, except in the mystery schools, in all university, academia and so on, was just producing arguments after arguments.
You see, up until Bacon's day, it was the church that was in control. And in fact, the church was in control up until about the 1800s. So the church was in control, but the church hierarchy wasn't necessarily pure Christian.
When they say, yeah,
there was a lot of people that were there because they could handle 3 or 4 languages and they had great intellect, but were they Christians? Real Christians? No, likely they were not. They knew their scripture, of course, but they were operating by the world system, and so the world system corrupted them.
This corruption extended to their powers of discernment. While the Bible teaches that men should prove all things, many church academics in the Middle Ages trusted in an unsound method of deductive reasoning based upon a faulty understanding of the Scriptures.
And typically it would go this way, to give an example. They would take from the book of Acts where it says, and the gospel was preached to the whole world. That's one statement. Now the common statement that goes with that is, but the disciples and the apostles never went to the whole world. And therefore you could deduce from those 2 statements that, well, there were no people on the other side of the world to preach to. You see, well, obviously there were, because the explorers found there were people in Australia and Tasmania. Years later they found that. So there were other people on the other side of the world. So you see, they got the wrong deduction using that method of deduction, and that's what Francis Bacon pointed out. He said there's so much nonsense.
And so Bacon set out to establish a scientific method, one by which mankind might achieve all knowledge. Through this method, Bacon sought to bring forth a light that would eventually disclose and bring into sight all that is most hidden and secret in the universe. But first, he would have to find a way to overcome the stubborn traditions employed by the academics of his day, who would rather debate than examine.
Bacon gives a great example in exasperation when he was at university. He saw that there were professors and students spent 3 or 4 years debating how many teeth a horse has. Nobody went out to actually count them. They just wasted all that time debating how many teeth a horse has. So he saw that as fruitless, wasn't producing anything good or useful, and humanity just was not evolving, and there's so many people in poverty and sickness. So he wanted to relieve that poverty and sickness, and get us towards a future paradise, a world paradise, not just for the England, but for the world. So he really started the whole principles of modern science, which is this experimental method. And then he had a formula to start with the basics, the physical world, which is physics, physical laws, and then work upwards towards metaphysics and so on. He couldn't talk too openly when it got to metaphysics because it landed him in trouble with the religions of the time, who were at war with each other. So he had to do that in a more careful way, more veiled way. But right about it he did.
Bacon's metaphysical ideas led him into teachings that would have been condemned by both the Catholic and Protestant churches of his day. He is said to have made contact with the spirit realm, and that upon hearing a heavenly voice, he was given his life's work. To protect himself, he kept his practices veiled within secret societies. In particular, the ancient Brotherhood of the Rose and Cross. The Rosicrucians had long believed that powers and principalities from the spirit realm possessed secret knowledge that might be used for the benefit of mankind. These and other teachings were to be kept hidden from those considered profane, and especially from the Church.
The Rosicrucians had to be a secret society. Their object was to discover God's truths after him. But some of their methodology was bordering on witchcraft. For instance, the transmutation of base metals into gold, they claimed they could do it. I don't think so. They claimed that they could communicate with angels and demons. Well, in the first place, the scripture tells you not to do it. But their idea was that if you could do that, surely those people, those creatures at least, the angels and the demons, they know a lot of things that we don't know. After all, they've been around since time immemorial, and they are familiar with heaven itself, so surely they can tell us many secrets. Well, the church, you see, would take a dim view of that. They could be put to death for that sort of thing.
The Rosicrucian Society had been formed in England prior to Bacon's birth, in part for the purpose of protecting Queen Elizabeth I. In the 16th century, the conflict between Roman Catholicism and the Protestant Church of England was at its peak. Mary Tudor, the daughter of King Henry VIII, took the throne and earned the title Bloody Mary.
They were looking for another heir, and so there were no boy heirs of, or no legal boy heirs of Henry, but he had daughters. And so we have Mary. And Mary was now 37, she was one of his daughters, and so she was installed as queen, and that was just after he died, so that would be in 58. And she was a Catholic, a dyed-in-the-wool Catholic, and she had actually married Prince Philip II of Spain. Of course, he was a Catholic too. So the first thing that Mary did was to repeal those laws which permitted the Protestants to practice their religion. Repealed them and then forcefully put to death as many Christians that were of the Protestant faith as she could find. Within the confines of the data that we have, she put to death 300, so there was 300 martyrs there that we know about in the short 6-year reign that she had.
No one was safe from Mary's wrath against the so-called Protestant heretics, not even her own sister. Elizabeth Tudor was also the daughter of King Henry VIII, with his second wife, Anne Boleyn, whom Henry had married after divorcing Catherine of Aragon, the mother of Queen Mary.
When she was installed as queen, she put her sister Elizabeth I in jail because she was suspected of being a Protestant, so she went to the Tower of London.
While imprisoned in the Tower, Elizabeth formed a friendship with a mysterious member of the court, a mathematician and mystic named Dr. John Dee.
He was known in the early Elizabethan days as the real wise man, the magus, and he was into a lot of esoteric study. He was certainly an initiate of the wisdom traditions.
Dr. John Dee was one of the foremost geniuses of his day.
John Dee was 34 years older than Francis Bacon, and John Dee was a mathematician, lived in London. He was a mathematician and astrologer to Queen Mary Tudor. That's Bloody Mary.
While Dee began in Mary's service, he soon fell out of favor because of his bizarre experiments, and some say his friendship with Elizabeth. In any case, Dee was imprisoned under suspicion of sorcery, an accusation that would follow him throughout his life, and one that seems not unfounded, considering his system of magic is still practiced by many occultists to this day.
One thing that he is most noted for today among occultists is that he and a fellow named Edward Kelly, who was a medium, did magical invocations related to the Book of Enoch to produce an entire, what today is called, Enochian system of magic. And it's this incredibly complex language and alphabet and cubes and magic squares, and it's extremely complex, and it's very, very powerful.
In his quest for knowledge, Dee tapped into the powers of the beyond, hoping to learn secrets from the spirit realm.
But that's not to say he wasn't trying to communicate with angels. He did. And they can be contacted and talked with. Roughly it means messengers of God. So that's what Dee was trying to do in his own way. But he obviously was too open about it, so in the end he got persecuted for this.
But not everyone saw Dee's dabbling as communicating with angels of God. Dee once wrote that he was looked upon as a companion of hellhounds, a caller and a conjurer of wicked and damned spirits. Yet like Bacon, he practiced much of his craft in secret as an active member of the Rosicrucians in England. Some even credit Dee with founding the modern Rosicrucian movement. As such, communing with angelic beings that provide scientific knowledge was a familiar practice.
Now, there was a pretty very brief and shady dividing line between what they called scientific knowledge and what we might call outright witchcraft today. It was the demarcation there was very shadowy.
This shadowy line was one that Dee crossed many times. Yet for a while, he flourished under the reign of Queen Elizabeth. During this era, some believe that he was a kind of mentor to Sir Francis Bacon.
Well, we know from Dee's diary that Bacon made one visit, at least, to Dr. John Dee's home at Mortlake. And when these visits were recorded, Dee was, meaning people had come to talk with Dee and discuss esoteric matters with him and to use his library and so on like that. So we know that that's a historical record we have. Otherwise, it's circumstantial evidence. Bacon clearly knew Dr. John Dee because he was an important person in Queen Elizabeth's court, and Francis Bacon was a courtier.
Perhaps the reason for the lack of records in Bacon's relationship with John Dee is that their work was done behind the veil of secret societies.
There's always been these secret societies trying to promote learning and raise the level of people's thought and culture to a kinder level and higher level. But mostly they've worked in secret because the church, most of the different churches have been so, not very kind.
The problem we're dealing with here is that Europeans discovered an awful lot of information, and very important, good, solid information of sciences that had been, developed richly elsewhere and that were brought into Europe and were so threatening to Christianity that they had to be suppressed. We know what happened to Galileo, and we know what happened to endless numbers of Giordano Bruno and so many others in science. They had to go underground. So the process of forcing knowledge and wisdom underground created a lot of coding and a lot of buzzwords and a lot of secret gestures and terms that still aren't understood to this day. So Dee is amongst that group.
While men such as Galileo were persecuted for representing scientific knowledge, the secret societies of the Elizabethan era were in danger not for the knowledge they possessed, but how they obtained it through occult practices of summoning spirits and conjuring demons. They were, nevertheless, determined to continue for the cause of science and learning. Dr. John Dee led the way in this arena. His method became known as angel magic because of his contact with spirits that Dee believed were sometimes good and sometimes evil. At one point, Dee's angels compelled him to visit the Holy Roman Emperor, Rudolph II, and tell him that he was wicked and that if he did not repent, God would throw him down. Incredibly, Dee obeyed the angels, visited the emperor, and established a friendship that would help to protect him from persecution later on. In his experiments, Dee worked with a medium named Edward Kelly. Kelly was the one who often made contact with the spirits Dee communed with. In a diary entry of June 8, 1584, Dee records a startling account. He claims that Kelly was greatly troubled when the angels tried to persuade him that Jesus was not God, and that no prayers ought to be made to him. They further claimed that sin did not really exist, and that man's soul simply moves from one body to another, in what sounds like reincarnation.
Through these mystics.
Upon hearing this, Kelly was apparently distraught and believed they had contacted evil spirits. Nevertheless, the angels provided Dr. D with gifts of knowledge.
I think we'll stop there. It's a 150 mark, and we'll try to wrap it up next time. All right, so we're getting close to being done with the first disc of this series of Chris Pinto documentaries, America's Secret Beginnings. And this part here, we're just looking at the connection of occultism to the Revolutionary War, from John Dee to Francis Bacon, into Rosicrucianism and Freemasonry, to the Hellfire Club and Benjamin Franklin, and just seeing the connection. And like I say, no matter which cult stream it's coming from, it all flows into that same ocean, the ocean of Luciferianism. It's always the same lie of the devil, knowledge and godhood. Gain this knowledge and you can be as gods. It's always that same temptation. It's a rejection of the authority of the scriptures and a seeking of knowledge elsewhere, seeking of the earthly, devilish, demonic wisdom rather than the wisdom of God. And that's ultimately foolish, because you're not going to attain godhood. You're going to die someday. John Dee's dead, Francis Bacon's dead, Benjamin Franklin's dead. They've all appeared before the judgment seat, and have been, unless they got saved in their later years, because their sin, no different than our own sin, they had to face condemnation and justice, the judgment of God. So all these streams, it's all the same lie. It's whether it's Kabbalah or whether it's Rosicrucians, whether it's Freemasons, whether it's humanism, whether it's deism, whether it's Buddhism, whether it's Jehovah's Witnesses, whether it's Mormonism, whether it's Roman Catholicism. It's all Luciferian at the top, and it's all that same lie. Ye shall be as gods. Attain this and you will be as gods. So it all flows into that same stream. So it's no wonder that they all have the same agenda. They're all getting their information from the same source, the principalities and powers that are directing this world into the Luciferian one world system. Yeah, it's like I say, very good documentary. All of Chris Pinto's stuff is really good. We're gonna watch a lot of his stuff here, but yeah, I guess that's what I got for you guys tonight. As always, I appreciate you watching. I love you, and Lord willing, we'll talk to you next time.